Yeah, so we're super excited to introduce our first speaker. First speaker is going to be the incredible Scott Williams from Human Marketing. Scott's actually calling in from California, so many thanks for starting your day nice and early with us, Scott. Morning there. And Scott's going to talk to us about how to build, test, and launch an app in the BigCommerce app marketplace. So please remember, if you've got any questions, chuck them in there in the Q&A space, and then we'll get Scott to answer those when we've finished. Over to you, Scott.
All right, thank you, Sam. Hey, everyone. I'm excited to meet you all and share with you. I wanted to touch on the topic of how to build, test, and launch an app on the BigCommerce app marketplace, something that many might dream of doing, but can be a little mystifying along the way. Just real quick, who you're hearing from, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Human Marketing. We are a full-service digital marketing agency in Southern California. And we focus heavily on e-commerce. BigCommerce is our preferred platform and favorite one to work on. Personally, I've been working with BigCommerce for about 11 or 12 years at this point, a long time. And over those years, I've submitted a number of apps on my own, on behalf of other SaaS companies that want to get into the marketplace, and then have consulted others along the way. So I'm hoping to bring some of that experience from many long hours, late nights, and through the blood, sweat, and tears of figuring all this out to make your lives a little bit easier. So here's what we're going to cover today. I want to just touch briefly on ideation, validation, and minimum viable product, and then how to build, test, and launch your app. My hope is that I'll connect some dots for you. You know, the documentation can be great, but sometimes connecting all those dots can be a big challenge. And then if you've already got some experience, maybe fill in some gaps along the way. And then ultimately, I want you to walk away knowing that if this is something that you want to do, that you are capable and that you have the ability to do this. So I'm hoping it's a bit encouraging as well. I'm going to tell the story just to try and bring this to life a little bit through my most recent app launch, which is Atomic Widgets, which went live in the marketplace 2 weeks ago. And hopefully that helps you see how this actually gets implemented off of documentation into real life. The first thing that we really want to do here is start with the idea. Never want to forget this. Oftentimes, you know, as developers, we either feel stuck, maybe we don't know what to do, or we just come up with some random idea. But this is a critical part of the process, is making sure that you find an idea that people actually want and desire. In the case of Atomic Widgets, this was birthed out of many years of working with clients, building custom code, reinventing the wheel over and over and over again. And then even as a marketing agency where we have full design team, content team, development team, oftentimes it would take us a really long time to get things to the market, and that would frustrate clients. And I kept hearing from clients and prospects, hey, we want this, but we want it faster, or why can't I have what this big e-com company has? And we want these tools. And so Atomic Widgets was an attempt to bring those to everyone else, which for context, Atomic Widgets is a suite of customization and marketing tools to help stores better monetize their storefront by using Page Builder. So a bunch of widgets for Page Builder. Once you have some of your ideas, you want to make sure that your idea is going to resonate with the market and be technically feasible. This is a critical step. If you don't think through this, you can potentially waste hundreds or thousands of hours building something that nobody wants. So market validation is a critical piece along the way. In our case, this was vetted by merchants, by conversations, and different pieces that I had heard over years and had conversations with various people on the way. You don't want to forget about the technical validation as well. This is a key piece if you want to make sure that what you're setting out to do is actually possible. So maybe you want to take shortcuts. You can see a screenshot here of Postman, of one of the very first requests of, can we create a widget via Postman? And then can it do what we want it to do inside of Page Builder? The next step is MVP, or minimum viable products. So before you go all the way into building something, maybe you just want to validate, all right, now that we see people express some interest, can we actually get them to commit in some way, shape, or form? And you don't necessarily have to build an entire app to get to this point. You can start with a landing page, just a prototype, or a basic proof of concept. In our case, we entered the BigCom hackathon last summer and came in first place. And then a lot of the feedback from the videos and the demos were really what served as the MVP and validation out of that. To not belabor that point, we want to jump it right into building. When you go to build your app, you really want to start with architecture. So think through what is it that we want to build. I highly recommend that you really think through your requirements, both the functional and non-functional ones, which is a fancy way of saying, what is it going to do and what are the characteristics that it needs to have? Taking those and then translating that into the right technology to get you to your goal. Key tip, don't over-engineer your app too early. You'll wind up rewriting far more code than you ever intended to. As we dig into the architecture, then maybe the first place you want to start is thinking about the programming language or framework. If this is your first rodeo, I highly recommend checking out the sample apps that BigCommerce has at the developer.bigcommerce site. There's a lot of great tools there. The most actively maintained one is the Next.js sample app. And that's the one that we used for Atomic widgets. I previously used a lot of PHP and LAMP stack type things. Then in this case, we've been gravitating more towards React and Next, and we went with this. This could potentially save you lots of time by starting with one of these. Beware that there's maybe a little bit of bloat and things that you don't need in them. But if this is your first chance at doing this, you can do it. Side note, building from scratch can be incredibly educational, but it can really slow your dev process down. A lot of people wonder, do I need a database as they build their first app? Yes, you definitely need a database. You need this to store account data, user data, and any sort of dynamic application data. This is a key step in the process. You might consider options like MySQL, Postgres, or maybe even a NoSQL database. I've included some core tables here that you might want to add to your app that are really key ones. And then I gave you on the right a list of some of the early tables from Atomic widgets. Moving along, one of the most common questions I've gotten asked over the years is, do I need to host this myself? Can I just host this on BigCommerce's servers? To be clear, this is not a WordPress plugin where you just host it on the client site. You need to self-host your app. And the app is ultimately going to run in an iframe when it's accessed via the BigCommerce dashboard. So you host this yourself. You've got great options like Google Cloud, AWS. You can consider Heroku or any Linux server or VPS. In our case, we chose Google Cloud, specifically Google App Engine for Atomic widgets. I love this service because it gives me a lot of control, a lot of tangential services around it to really augment the app, things like PubSub, storage, logging, different tools like that. And it's still incredibly scalable, but it abstracts some of the complexity of a Linux server. There's very similar things out there as well. You can do this on a basic shared Linux hosting, but beware that you might have scaling issues if you do that beyond your testing phase. Now that you've kind of figured out your architecture, one of the first steps is to go into the developer portal and configure your app store listing. First, you need to be a technology partner. And then you want to go in here, and you don't need to fill this all the way out initially, but you must set this because you need to think through your callback URLs, which is effectively how do we authorize and install the app? And then how do we load the app once it's been installed? And so you need these URLs, and you need to set the permissions that your app is going to request, permissions like access to the product catalog, view or edit, things like that. Once you've completed that, you're going to capture that client ID and client secret to set it in your environment variables to make sure that your app can actually connect and have this conversation with BigCommerce. Key tip is to use ngrok in the early stages. This will save you lots of time. I'll touch on that maybe a little bit more later. Now that we have these tools, the client ID and the client secret, then you can start thinking through the authentication side of things. So with a BigCommerce app, the way it works is it uses OAuth, and effectively there's a conversation that happens between the merchant on BigCommerce and your application. And you use this for app install and login and load, at least initially. You can also layer your own authentication for future visits. I tend to, and in the case of Atomic widgets, I tend to just leverage the app via the BigCommerce dashboard and have people use it inside of there. It's the most convenient for them. Doesn't require an additional login or anything. Just to give you a quick idea of how that flow works, effectively the merchant clicks install on the app. They say, yes, you can have these permissions. Then the app receives that request and validates it and sends it back saying, please give me an access token. BigCommerce then verifies that your request is valid for this particular merchant, and it sends you a token that's client relevant to just a single store. So you're going to get one of these for every single store. It passes it back. You're going to store that token for future validation and for API requests. And then your app is going to render the UI so that they can see your app. Future visits are not nearly this complicated. Effectively, there's a request in your app validates it and renders the application. Moving along, some of the key things that we want to think about along the way are the data that your app needs. So if we're specifically an e-commerce app, there's probably data that we need from the storefront. What you need and how you're going to gather it really depends on your purposes, but some of the options look like a real-time data fetch. We might want to just grab the orders in real time within the app. But perhaps we want to capture the store information, the store details, maybe sync the product catalog. So for some of those, we want to do that on demand where the user triggers that, or maybe just on load of the app, and we can do that. But if you're fetching a product catalog that has hundreds of thousands of products, this isn't going to work very well for you. So oftentimes we want to think about batch syncing in the background, maybe via cron job, running it every 5 or 10 minutes, getting the latest and greatest data along the way. Webhooks can be incredibly helpful for this and making sure that once an event happens, maybe a product changes, an order comes in, that your application finds out about it in real time. But beware that if someone deletes their entire product catalog or uploads an entire product catalog with hundreds of thousands of products, this can trigger a lot of notifications for your app to process real quickly. So you might want to use some of these or a combination thereof. In the case of Atomic Widgets, what we do is every time someone loads the app, we do sync certain pieces like the multi-storefront channels and which ones they have. And then there's a few other pieces that we batch sync in the background. But for the most part, we don't actually rely on a lot of store information other than which channels do they have and basic info, because we're more so pushing widgets into their store. We don't need this as much. Payments. Oftentimes people are wondering, how do I capture payments in my app? How do I actually monetize it? People wonder, can I just use a BigCommerce checkout? That's not really the way to go here. What you really want to do is integrate something more deeply into your application. Stripe is the most common option here. It makes your life very easy, very developer friendly. What you're going to do is integrate that in so that when someone signs up for a plan, you're going to pass them over to Stripe, run them through a checkout, and then capture the results so that you can update your account. And this is a great option. And there's still some complexity, but Stripe makes it as easy as possible. It is worth noting that in Q1 2024 now, BigCommerce is going to launch their automated billing solution, which will be a much more deeply integrated tool for BigCommerce, and that will make your lives a lot easier. Moving along, I recommend that you really think through prioritization and focusing on the most critical elements of your application first to not have too much rework. I'm going to skip these for now for time. I'll make this available afterwards. How do you test your app? If you are the owner of a store and then you have the same email address as your developer account, then you can go into the apps and you'll see a draft app section and you'll be able to install your app from there. I recommend doing that on a sandbox at all times before you move it to production. You'll want to test the functionality. Recommend testing early and often, and every time you make a change, making sure that you do regression testing, making sure that you haven't broken something along the way. And just looking at some of the key things that you want to test, payments is perhaps one of the most complicated pieces, especially if you have multiple plans that has feature limiting and then multi-storefront as well. Test extensively. Trials can also complicate this. I've written out a number of testing scenarios for you just to guide a lot of your testing. I think this is perhaps one of the most helpful pieces just to really think through. You have to realize that many stores are built differently and have different settings and configurations. And so you'll want to test across multiple stores, multiple users. If you're going to support multi-storefront, you want to make sure that you've tested on multi-storefront sandboxes. Be aware that many stores will uninstall and reinstall your app immediately. And so this is a key testing scenario that you'll want to be aware of. And by the way, don't forget that people will use your app as unintended, not necessarily as intended. So test with people that don't know how to use your app. In terms of the launch, you'll want to make sure to run pre-submission checks and really think through all of the pieces here. Make sure to use existing APIs wherever possible. You want to make sure to maximize that iframe, really build out your app within the dashboard. That's something that BigCommerce is looking for, and have all that support documentation along the way. You want to prepare your App Store listing. Some key tips are to build out great testing instructions for the team and to fill out all of your marketing information, the descriptions, the screenshots, so forth and so on. And here's how it works is once you've tested your app and it's ready for review, you're going to pay a $99 fee from the developer portal. And don't note, you will not get a confirmation email. This can be confusing, but this status will update to pending, and potentially anywhere from 1 to 3, 4 weeks later, you'll hear back with any edits or questions from the team. And once it's approved, you've made those edits, then it will launch in the marketplace. Congratulations, you've just launched your first app. I know we've covered a lot in here in just a short period of time. I've listed out a number of resources that you can access later for where to go and how to find help, along with some additional tips for you along the way. Feel free to reach out to me. You can hit me up on BC Dev Slack. There's also a number of legends there that will be happy to help you along the way. And if you want to explore atomic widgets and kind of bring this to life a little bit further, you can find it on those resources. So I think I'm out of time. I know we just drank through a fire hose, but I hope that this is helpful in terms of really seeing the flow of how you go from idea all the way to launch for an app.
Cool. Thank you very much, Scott. That was amazing. You ready for some questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions. So what would you say, what are some of the most common mistakes that you've seen that have prevented your apps from being approved in the marketplace?
Yeah. So some of the most common ones that I've seen either in my own or in others and have heard of with others is oftentimes people are reinventing the wheel and not using the latest APIs where possible. That is a critical piece that will prevent the app from going live. Browser testing. In the past, I know I made a couple mistakes where I didn't test in certain backwards browsers, and that caused some issues along the way. And the other piece is, I think sometimes we forget to, as developers, we forget to fill out all the other details in the app listing and treat it like it's a last minute thing. But BigCommerce is going to want you to actually fill that out and have those screenshots and details so that it can go live and not look pretty janky on the marketplace.
Okay. All right. I guess where can I find ideas for that? There's a question that's coming.
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, definitely talking to merchants is a great place to go. You can also check out the ideas.BigCommerce site where merchants are looking for, suggesting ideas to BigCommerce, but oftentimes BigCommerce isn't going to address those. Maybe they don't fit in the platform or they're not ready yet. And so you can get a sense for what people are actually, where their pain points are and what they're looking for there. That's a good one as well.
Yeah, sure. Cool. So obviously in the past, we know you've worked on like things like the Swerve redirects up like quite a long time ago. How would you say your process of building an app has changed since, like how you would approach it now to how you might have approached something a lot older like that?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I think in the past, that one I built from scratch. That's a PHP one. Used all my own requests, didn't use a library or anything. I tend to use more libraries now. I learned a lot by not, but I tend to use more libraries. I also tend to focus much more on the UX side of things and really thinking through that user experience and much better onboarding into the app as well. That's a critical one. And then probably prioritizing the function earlier on in the process versus building the wrapper to the app and spending too much time doing that before I actually get to the core pieces of the app.
Cool. And then I guess we've got one final question, unless anyone would like to. Oh, we've got another one, so it's just coming. In the approval process for private apps, for private apps built for specific merchants? Is the approval process for private apps built specifically for merchants the same as public apps?
Um, for a private app, you're not really going to run it through an approval process. Typically, it would be my take. And so if you want it embedded in the dashboard, then you would just build it as a draft app associated with the owner account so that they can access it there. You can still install it. The storefront won't know any different. And then you don't actually have to go through the entire approval process. The other ways of doing it would be building it entirely on the outside and just leveraging APIs and generating API keys from the storefront and not truly treating it like a full-blown app.
Okay. Do you think would that be an approach that you would take if you were handling a private app like that, or would you go through the normal app?
Yeah, depending on the needs and the level of access. I think I've often built ones in that case where I'm just generating API keys and build it outside of the traditional app process. But if you had access to the owner account, it would maybe make sense to just to leave it as a draft app.
Yeah, I think we've tried both. We've had both those methods in space as well. Cool. And then the final question then would be, what have you found to be the hardest thing to test when you've been building an app?
Yeah, I think the hardest things are anything that has to do with, one of the challenges is just you want to be authenticated in as a store. And so always having to, log in, that's where ngrok comes in incredibly handily so that you can hot reload and make those quick changes. The other piece is, like I mentioned before, is some of the payment stuff. When you factor in the combination of trials and making sure the trial has or has not expired, multiple plans, multiple storefronts, feature gating along the way. It can just be a hassle, especially if you think of like a 30-day plan and then you need to speed it up for testing to like have it expire. Different things like that can just really, it's very time consuming at least.
Okay, great. I have actually just seen one more question that's coming in the chat. So how long does the submission approval process take typically? Is it days, weeks? And then
Weeks.
Does BigCommerce help if you're missing information, or do they just deny it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Typically, I've seen it take 3 to 4 weeks. Most historically, it's taken about 3 weeks, and they hear back, and it takes about a week to process. Atomic widgets went much faster this time. And I don't know if that's that the process has changed or that they're processing things faster, but I think that one was 8 days for me. But mostly I would say expect a month. And then, yeah, if there are issues, they're not going to straight deny it. They'll come back with, hey, here's some edits to make along the way. Some of those might be smaller, like, hey, you don't have your thumbnail images, your screenshots, or you should tweak this within the app. But if you have a fundamental issue, like you're not using the APIs properly, then that's maybe going to be a showstopper. But for the most part, it winds up being a process, and it's not, you failed, then you need to go resubmit, pay the fee again. It's a conversation back and forth until the app is ready.
Thank you very much for your time, Scott, and we'll give you a big virtual round of applause. So thank you. That was great presentation.
Thanks. That was helpful.